and cancer rates in America were increasing in unfluoridated areas as well. But you have to take into consideration also that fluoridated products like fluoridated toothpaste were become more commonly used. But what it shows conclusively and absolutely is such a huge increase in cancer so quickly directly correlated with the timing of the introduction of fluoridation. And we had an Australian scientist study this in conjunction with the Americans, and he occupied an extremely influential position as editor of chemical abstracts. So across his desk were coming hundreds and then thousands of papers about fluoride toxicology, and so he became one of the world's most eminent experts in fluoride, and he analysed early results that showed a dramatic increase in these gut-related cancers. And as you know, bowel cancer in particular in Australia is part of a national study now. Personally, I would like to get some postcode studies of bowel cancer versus fluoridation status for the nation, but we need to do more than that. We need to know where people have lived over their entire lives and their pre-birth time in order to look at this. But clearly with such dramatic increases as reported decades ago in these cancer rates, why is anyone in Australia still willing to promote this stupid practice? And a little known result now, some of you will know that the Americans invaded Okinawa in 1945, and one of their first acts was to rescue a lot of Japanese soldiers who were dying of malaria by giving them anti-malarial drugs. The Japanese didn't have any drugs at all, and the Japanese were losing more soldiers to malaria than in the fighting. But once the Americans occupied Okinawa, they thought that it would be a brilliant place strategically for them, so they effectively took it over as a province of the United States. They occupied it and continued to occupy it as a military base for decades. And one of the things that they did was to fluoridate the Okinawa water. And this had a direct impact on uterine cancer. So here we have the uterus and the placenta both being assaulted by fluoride, the Americans deliberately fluoridating the Japanese, and a direct result, uterine cancer as a result. In 1969-70, the Japanese came to their own conclusions that they had a real problem with women dying. This is death, by the way, this is not incidence, this is death. They knew that they had their citizens being killed by the American fluoride, and so the Japanese told the Americans to cease fluoridation. And after the fluoridation was cut off, the uterine death rate fell dramatically. Now clearly a number of women who've been fluoridated, possibly since 1945, continue to have fluoride in their system, and then, as we know, cancers take time to develop. But what happened was that the incidence of uterine cancer in the areas that had been fluoridated remained higher than in the non-fluoridated areas of Okinawa. So this paper was specifically ignored in numerous scientific reviews because it was produced in a language originally other than English. In particular, the Americans often have a specific exclusion clause that they won't consider a scientific study if it wasn't done in America or if it was done in any other language than English. Clearly, this is a paper that I found recently. I think it's devastating evidence. It just helps to add up to the miserable saga of the impact of this toxin. Now, we've talked about fluoride, and this will leave some of you bamboozled. Hands up anyone who's done chemistry as a subject. Okay, that's good, just not very many. So I'd like you now to touch your teeth. Very important because we're looking now at the crystals of your teeth as a chemist views your crystals. The mineral content of our teeth is made up of a substance called hydroxyapatite. And it's a calcium phosphate, and it contains oxygen atoms with a hydrogen attached, which is called a hydroxyl group. And the aim of the pro-fluoridationists exclusively is to knock those hydroxyl groups out of that lattice and replace them with the fluoride ion. Fluorine, as most of you here are knowledgeable know, is the element 9 on the periodic table. It does not occur naturally as the naked atom anywhere on Earth. It always grabs an electron to form the negative fluoride ion. And it's that negative fluoride ion that the pro-fluoridationists want to convince you will have a magical effect on this crystal of your teeth. So we'll just talk briefly now about, now that we've introduced hydroxyapatite as the substance of your teeth and your bones, what we're now going to talk about is breast cancer being induced by fluoride and the mechanism by which that occurs. So at an epidemiological level, looking at populations, very large studies have been done to look at food intakes, and there's a group here in Sweden who studied a very large sample of women over a very long time to see whether they developed breast cancer. And they, as part of their studies, they compared coffee drinkers with tea drinkers. And what they found was that if you drink coffee, there was no statistically significant variation in the incidence of breast cancer. However, for tea drinkers, and in particular high tea drinkers, there was a statistically very significant increase in breast cancer in tea drinkers, and this was dose related. So if you were drinking 1 cup a day, you had a certain risk. If you were drinking 4 cups a day, you had a much higher risk. And so the question is, tea, and I'm saying it equals fluoride. Tea is one of the greatest sources of fluoride in your diet, in the average Western diet. Dry tea, either black or green tea, can have up to 8,000 parts per million dry weight of fluoride in the substance. So it's an extremely dangerous and subtle source of fluoride poisoning. So in the campaign to eliminate fluoridation, it's mandatory that we warn people that tea is one of the major hazards to this toxin, and there's no way we can get away from that argument. This, of course, is a culturally very difficult thing for people to accept. The idea of sitting down having a cup of tea or Bex in a good night out was famous, it'd be good for you. In fact, the evidence is not there. So now we look at, could it be something else in the tea? Could it be something other than fluoride causes this increase in cancer, which is relevant? Well, tea also contains a substance called oxalate, and women can develop crystals in their breasts of calcium oxalate, and they can develop crystals of hydroxyapatite, the same material that forms your bones and your teeth, can be observed in breast tissue. And so what scientists have found out is that if a woman has calcium oxalate crystals, which may be enhanced by tea drinking in their breasts, they tend not to go malignant. Basically, one can say that they won't develop malignant breast cancer, life-threatening cancer. However, if hydroxyapatite crystals are detected in their breasts, and this can be done by X-ray, getting a pattern, or a biopsy can be done with microscopic identification. If they have hydroxyapatite crystals in their breast, the hydroxyapatite is stabilised by the addition of fluoride in the same manner that dentists will tell you fluoride will stabilise the surface of the tooth to a few atomic layers. So we're talking now about fluoride in combination with hydroxyapatite precipitation, and people have actually taken synthetic hydroxyapatite crystals, and they've taken human cultures from breast tissue cancers, and they can demonstrate a catalytic effect. If the hydroxyapatite is present, they can induce rapid proliferation of malignant cancer. So you can do it in the test tube, and you can observe it in the living woman. Now, moving briefly on to thyroid problems. This is an undeniable fact, as we know from the industry. Fluoride used to be used as a deliberate medicine to suppress a person's thyroid function if they had what was known as hyperthyroidism, in other words, an overactive thyroid gland. It stands to reason, therefore, that if you add fluoride to people with normal thyroid function, you will also lower their thyroid performance. So this is not rocket science, it's just simple common sense. And there's a recent paper here in 2014 which quantifies the impact on the various thyroid hormones, but it also shows that it has interesting effects like delaying the eruption of teeth in the heavily fluoridated areas. Once again, I don't expect you to take all this information on board, but if any of you have thyroid problems, or know people with thyroid problems, you can examine to what extent fluoride may be exacerbating the problem, or did it actually induce their condition. And of course, once you muck around with the human's thyroid gland, one of our key endocrine hormone suppliers with numerous incorrect effects across the body, all of these symptoms, this is taken from a medical book on the left, these are all undeniable impacts of a wonky thyroid on your total life existence. It gets to you in numerous ways. And so a number of people are given synthetic thyroid hormone to try to counter out a deficient one. But one of the things that is not spoken about in public is the dreadful fact that hydroxyapatite crystals in your thyroid gland, if they are detected, gives you an 18% of malignant thyroid cancer. And so this is commonly referred to with the pseudonym of calcification. So if your cancer surgeon talks to you about having calcification, they're talking to you about having fluoride-doped hydroxyapatite detected in your organ, which may be in numerous organs, but in this particular case, if they detect the hydroxyapatite, the universal recommendation is to have your entire thyroid removed as an urgent measure, because there's a very high death rate. And so your danger of going malignant far outweighs any treatment problems to the rest of your life by removing your thyroid and living permanently on synthetic hormone. Now, I'm not very happy with the Australian medical authorities, and one of the reasons is that they refuse to teach medical students in any of our medical colleges about fluorosis. They're not taught about dental fluorosis. They are in some dental schools. It receives a 5-minute mention, and it's largely described as a cosmetic effect. But in our medical schools, our doctors are not trained. So I recommend that if you've got a medical problem, you'd be better off with a Pakistani or an Indian doctor, because they are trained in recognising fluorosis of a systemic nature. They know because of the natural contamination that occurs in their countries from well water, and they see crippling fluorosis. And of course the Chinese doctor will also know, because up until the Chinese authorities took measures to eliminate fluoride from water supplies, there was rampant fluorosis. And this is displayed with symptoms that are often misdiagnosed. So if you go along to a doctor and complain about lower back pain, they might recommend an analgesic. They might not look at what is physically causing the growth of bone in an irregular shape cutting into the nerve of the spine. And here we have an illustration that the fluoride may not come from the water supply or tea drinking. It may come from a drug that's given to you to save your life. So in this case, there's a drug here, I won't bother even mentioning it by name, but the fact is that when a person has an organ transplant, these days they're given a drug to stop the body rejecting the new organ. However, our bodies recognise these drugs as totally unnatural, and our livers activate processes to eliminate the molecule. And so that molecule displayed on the list is an anti-rejection drug, and our bodies are capable of completely gobbling that up and yielding the naked fluoride ion to circulate in our bloodstream. And the impact of that is shown on the right. You can see